On the day of his wedding, just as the music swelled and the crowd stood, Silas Wren saw her. Not the woman in white waiting to become his wife, but her, the one who once had his heart. Celeste Rowan walked into the venue wearing a calm expression and a deep green dress that moved like a memory. By her side was a young girl, 10 years old maybe, chestnut hair, quiet eyes that looked just like his. In that moment, everything around him faded. The guests, the vows, the deal he thought he was sealing with a ring. She didn't come to ruin anything. She came to introduce someone. The little girl glanced up and held her mother's hand tighter. Silas didn't know her name, didn't even know she existed, but her face said everything. He was a father, and nobody had told him. Have you ever been so sure you closed a chapter, only to find out the story kept writing itself without you? Maybe you thought you walked away from something clean, but the past has a way of returning when you least expect it. If you've ever loved someone too late, or been the one left waiting, you'll want to stay with this story. It's about missed moments, quiet choices, and the one truth we all learn eventually: success means nothing when the people you love aren't part of it. If you're new here or coming back for more, welcome to Mr. Ross Story Trail. We tell human stories that hold a mirror to your life. Before we go any deeper, please subscribe, like, and share. It helps this channel grow and helps us bring more stories like this straight to you. Silas Wren built an empire, the kind of man whose name made stock markets lean forward, a man who turned silence into strategy and presence into power. But there was one thing he never saw coming. Not betrayal, not competition, not failure. A child, his child, born not out of scandal, but out of a night he barely let himself remember. A night when love whispered what words couldn't say. A night that left more behind than memories. So how did a man who seemed to have everything suddenly realize he had missed everything that mattered? Stay with me, because this story doesn't move the way you'd expect. It doesn't shout, it aches, it doesn't explode. It reveals, and by the end you'll understand why sometimes a broken heart is the only way a real one begins to beat. Before that wedding day, before the empire, before the silence, there was them, not as strangers across a room, but as two people who once believed love was enough. Let me take you back to where it all began. 12 years ago in New Haven, the kind of autumn that makes the air taste like crisp apples and old books had settled over the city. Silas Wren stepped off a train with a backpack slung over one shoulder, his thoughts still caught in the tangle of codes and venture pitches he'd absorbed at a tech expo in Boston. His mind rarely quieted. It was always moving, always calculating. But for a second, it stopped. Across the station platform, a woman stood still in the middle of the crowd, not checking her phone, not pacing, just standing, watching the leaves fall outside the glass. She wore denim overalls splattered with faded paint and a long coat that trailed slightly behind her. A scarf clung halfway out of her pocket, barely hanging on. He noticed the scarf first, then her face, then the small sketchbook pressed to her chest like a secret. Silas hadn't spoken all morning, but something about her, how still she was in the middle of everything, pulled at him like a thread he didn't know he was missing. The scarf dropped. He picked it up. "Excuse me," he said, offering it back. She smiled, soft but sharp. "Thanks. It likes to escape. Sketchbook too?" She raised an eyebrow. "Only when it's full." He didn't want to walk away. He almost never did things without calculating the outcome. But this wasn't logic. This was instinct. "I'm Silas, Celeste." And that was it. No dramatic music, no whirlwind. Just a scarf, a smile, and two people who weren't supposed to meet that day. They ended up walking the long way out of the station together, somehow matching strides. She told him she painted murals, big ones, the kind that took weeks to finish and left her fingertips stained with color. Her studio was 3 blocks from the train line, tucked behind a flower shop with no sign on the door. He told her about an app he was building, a scheduling tool for musicians that no one had funded yet but that he couldn't let go of. She teased him gently. "So, a digital calendar for people with chaos in their souls?" Basically, they laughed. That first walk turned into coffee. Coffee turned into lunches on park benches, dinners in late-night diners, and weekends spent in Celeste's sunlit studio, where jazz played low and the smell of paint lingered on every surface. Silas, who lived his life by deadlines and data, started showing up without a plan. Celeste, who'd always guarded her solitude like treasure, began saving a second cup on her windowsill, just in case he came by. He once found her on a ladder painting the side of a community center. She was covered in cobalt blue, humming along to a record player on the sidewalk. "I thought you hated heights," he called out. "I do," she yelled back, "but I love this wall more." He stayed until the sun dipped low, bringing her dinner wrapped in foil. They sat on the ground eating with paint-stained hands. She had a speck of green on her cheek. He didn't tell her. He liked her better that way, unpolished, unfiltered, entirely herself. She asked him once why he never talked about his past. He hesitated, then replied, "Because I'm too busy trying to outrun it." She didn't push, just nodded, then leaned her head on his shoulder. In that silence, something grew, not fast, not loud, but real. For a while it felt like they were invincible. Silas and Celeste existed in their own rhythm, woven between her painted canvases and his late-night coding marathons. They shared a tiny apartment above a bookstore, where the plumbing stuttered and the floors creaked in all the right places. Mornings started with burnt toast, mismatched socks, and Celeste dancing barefoot while brushing her teeth. Silas, always organized to a fault, grew to love the chaos. It reminded him that he didn't need to be perfect to be loved. She used to sketch him when he wasn't looking, during breakfast, while he was deep in thought at his desk, once even while he napped on the floor among a mess of blueprints. "Why me?" he asked once, catching her in the act. Celeste shrugged. "Because your face changes when you're not performing for the world." There was a stillness she loved in him, a gentleness that peeked out when the pressure faded. And Silas? He found a calm he didn't know he needed. With Celeste, time slowed down. He laughed more, dreamed wider, even slept better. They talked about everything, what made them scared, what made them stay, the kind of future they might build if the world didn't get in the way. One afternoon, while lying on a blanket at the park, Celeste pointed to the clouds. "If you weren't building tech, what would you be?" Silas thought hard, then said, "A writer." She blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "I like the idea of building something that doesn't rely on money to matter." She stared at him for a moment, then smiled and whispered, "You already do." He kissed her. The world felt endless then, but slowly the cracks started to whisper. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to notice. A missed dinner here, a forgotten Sunday plan there. Silas began taking more investor meetings, long calls late at night, sleepless work marathons in the office. He told himself it was just for now, just until the launch, just until the funding came through, but each just turned into a pattern. Celeste would wait at their favorite cafe, sketchbook in hand, until the tea turned cold. He'd apologize, kiss her forehead, and promise to make it up to her. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. He never stopped loving her. But slowly, without meaning to, he began loving his mission more. Celeste saw it in small things, when he answered emails during dinner, when his gaze drifted over her shoulder even as she spoke, when her name became something scheduled in his calendar instead of something that pulsed in his chest. She never yelled, never fought. She simply started going quiet. And Silas, distracted by deadlines and deals, didn't hear the silence for what it was, a warning. One night, Celeste left a charcoal sketch taped to his laptop screen. It showed two people sitting side by side on a bench, holding hands, but looking in opposite directions. He didn't mention it. She didn't bring it up, but neither of them forgot it. The next morning, she made breakfast. He left early for a presentation. They kissed like roommates, and the days kept going. It was late spring when the city began to bloom again, but inside their apartment, everything felt colder. Silas had just closed a major deal, a partnership that would push his company into the national spotlight. There were congratulations, messages, interview requests. His phone buzzed constantly. Celeste stood at the balcony, the glow of the streetlights spilling across her skin. She wore one of his button-down shirts, creased, oversized, sleeves rolled up halfway. Her fingers absently touched the railing, but her mind was far from the view. Inside, Silas was on a call, again. She didn't blame him, not really. She just missed the man who used to paint silly messages on foggy windows, who once stayed up until 3 a.m., helping her mix paint colors for a mural no one had paid her to make. The man who once said he felt found when she walked into his life. Now she felt like someone waiting to be remembered. When he finally hung up and joined her, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that begged to be filled, but neither of them tried. "You remember Paris?" she asked softly. He leaned beside her. "Of course. You said my painting made your eyes too green." "I lied. I liked how you saw me." She turned to face him, The wind moved her hair just slightly. Her eyes didn't accuse, they just searched his. "Do you still see me?" she asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He looked at her. Really looked. The woman who used to fall asleep against his chest while mumbling ideas for her next mural. The one who never asked for anything, but gave him everything. "I want to," he said, barely above a whisper. She nodded, her gaze softening. "I wish that was enough." But that night they didn't fight. They didn't tear the room apart with blame. Instead, they came together gently, as if holding on to the last warm ember between them. He kissed her forehead. She kissed his collarbone. They undressed without urgency, as if time itself had slowed just for them. Their bodies moved in rhythm, not with passion alone, but with grief, with memory, with love that was still alive but no longer growing. He held her as if she were something he knew he was about to lose, and maybe she already knew she'd made up her mind. That this was goodbye. That sometimes the greatest act of love is leaving before the other person notices you're already gone. The next morning, she made coffee. He was already gone, called to the office for an emergency pitch rehearsal. When he came home that night, the studio was quiet. Her easel stood untouched. Her keys were gone. So was her scarf, the one he once picked up at the train station. There was no note, only a sketch pinned to the fridge, two hands drifting apart, one still trying to hold on. Silas stood in the kitchen for hours, staring at it. But he didn't cry. He didn't chase after her. He buried himself in work instead. That's what he knew how to do. He told himself if she wanted to come back, she would. She never did. The apartment hadn't changed much. Celeste had come back for one reason, to gather the last few pieces of her life from the place that once felt like home. She hadn't expected him to be there, but Silas was sitting on the edge of the couch, shoes off, tie loosened, hands pressed together as if he'd been waiting, though neither of them had planned it. "I thought you had a product launch tonight," she said. "I canceled the dinner," he replied. "Didn't feel right showing off when I couldn't even keep the one thing that mattered." She didn't speak, just looked around the room. The stack of unopened mail, the crooked painting they never fixed, the bookshelf missing the plant she took with her. The air felt heavy with everything they hadn't said. "Did you come to say goodbye?" he asked. She nodded. "I think we already did." There was no music, no dramatic gestures, only the low hum of the city outside and two people caught between what they had and what they couldn't hold anymore. He stood slowly, walked to her, his hand brushed hers, unsure. "Can I make you tea?" he offered. She smiled faintly. "You never learned how." He exhaled through his nose, a half laugh, half sigh, and dropped his hand. "I don't want this to be the last time I see you," he admitted. "I don't want it to hurt," she whispered. Their eyes met, not with fire, but with exhaustion. Two hearts carrying too much. He moved toward her again, slower this time, until he was standing inches away. She didn't step back. "You still wear my shirts," he said softly, noticing the familiar button-down clinging loosely to her frame. She nodded. "Only the ones that never stop smelling like you." He lifted his hand, barely touching a strand of hair near her cheek. "Do you want to stay?" "I don't know," she answered. "But I want to feel like we mattered." He leaned in, and she didn't stop him. They kissed like people who had done it 100 times but knew this one would be different. There was no rush, no firestorm of passion, just warmth, memory, longing. He wrapped his arms around her, and she let her head rest against his chest. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The bedroom smelled like the candle she left behind, a soft vanilla scent that still lingered on his pillow. She slid the shirt off her shoulders. He undid the buttons slowly, like each one was a moment being returned. She touched the side of his face, traced the line of his jaw, as if memorizing him one last time. They undressed each other without speaking, the way you take your time with something fragile. In that silence, they found each other again, not as they were now, but as they once had been. He kissed her shoulder. She kissed the space above his heart. If this story resonates with you so far, drop a comment and let us know. What would you have done in her place? Would you have stayed for one more night, or walked away for good? They moved together with a quiet reverence, as if touching a memory they couldn't afford to break. There was no desperation, no fiery rush, just the ache of knowing this was the last place they'd meet without words getting in the way. Silas kissed her like someone trying to hold on without gripping too tight. Celeste traced every inch of his back with her fingertips, not to possess him, but to remember the shape of what they once had. He whispered her name. She whispered, "I know." Every breath was heavy with understanding, every touch a chapter closing, The air between them wasn't filled with moans or declarations. It was the weight of two people realizing that even love, when neglected too long, begins to fold in on itself. They moved slowly, body to body, heart to heart, eyes open, foreheads pressed together. Each motion was an apology neither of them had ever spoken aloud. She ran her hand through his hair like she used to, and for a moment he was the same man who once danced with her under a flickering kitchen light. They stayed like that, wrapped in warmth, long after it was over. Not tangled, not rushed, just still. Sometime in the early hours, Celeste rose from bed and stood by the window. The city lights were dimming. She watched as a cab rolled past below, its engine low, headlights cutting through the mist that clung to the pavement. Behind her, Silas stirred slightly but didn't wake. She looked back at him, the man she loved, the man who never meant to hurt her, but who did all the same. She slipped on the shirt he had unbuttoned hours earlier, walking quietly to the small desk in the corner. She opened her sketchbook and tore out a page. It wasn't a goodbye note. It was a sketch. Him, lying asleep, peaceful, unaware, not alone, but not held either. She folded it once and left it on the nightstand. Then she turned to the bed, watched him breathe, watched the rise and fall of a chest she used to fall asleep against. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry yet. She pressed her lips to his forehead, soft and light, like a mother kissing a child who'll never know she came in the room. "I'll love you longer than you'll remember," she whispered. Then she picked up her bag, grabbed the scarf from the coat rack, and walked out the door. She didn't know that night would change both their lives. Didn't know it would leave, behind a little girl with the same eyes, the same quiet. She only knew she had to leave before she stayed too long again, because love, when stretched too far, becomes grief disguised as loyalty, and she had already learned that kind of grief too many times. Silas woke up hours later to sunlight breaking through the blinds. The space beside him was empty, the sheets still warm. He called her name once, then again. No answer. He found the sketch before anything else, looked at it for minutes unmoving. He didn't cry. He didn't know what to feel. All he knew was it felt like goodbye, but even then, he had no idea she had left with something more than sorrow. She had left with a piece of him, one that would come back when he least expected. The house was enormous. Glass walls, steel lines, polished stone floors that echoed even the quietest footsteps. Silas Wren stood at the edge of his living room, looking out toward the snowy ridges beyond the property line. The view was perfect. Everything in his life was, on the surface. He had spent years building this. Rencore was now a household name. His face had been on tech magazines, investor panels, international stages. Entire companies lived or died, depending on whether he nodded in a meeting. And yet, the silence inside this mansion made the walls feel heavier than they looked. Success had given him a kingdom, but it hadn't taught him how to enjoy it. Delia Ryan's voice echoed down the hallway as she paced on a call, slipping from one investor pitch into another. She had that kind of presence, sharp, always moving, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Her heels made clean, clicking sounds across the tile, like punctuation marks in the air. They were perfect on paper, both powerful, disciplined, driven. They spoke the same language, valuation, leverage, growth. But when Silas looked at her, he didn't feel still. He hadn't felt still in a long time. Delia was impressive, ambitious, focused. But she never asked him how he slept at night, never noticed when his voice got quiet instead of confident. They didn't fight. They didn't need to. Their relationship was an agreement, 2 people aligned in strategy, but not in soul. The wedding was a week away, a luxury retreat in the mountains, hand-selected guests, signature cocktails with clever names, 5-star everything. Delia had hired a team to manage it all. Silas just nodded and signed checks. The guest list sat on the counter. Silas scanned the names, business partners, industry leaders, family he barely spoke to. His hand stopped near the bottom of the list. There was an empty space. Not a name, just space. He stood there for a while. His assistant had asked 3 times whether there were any personal names he wanted added. He said no each time. But now, he wasn't so sure. He walked over to the drawer in his study, pulled out a box of invitations, thick paper, gold-lined, formal to the point of arrogance. He took one out and stared at it. There was no reason to send it, no obligation, no benefit. Delia wouldn't ask questions. They didn't share their pasts unless it involved past deals. Still, his hand moved before his mind had made a decision. He wrote out the name slowly. Celeste Rowan. It felt strange, seeing her name on something that belonged to this world of contracts and dinner parties. He hesitated at the address. He wasn't even sure she still lived there, but he hadn't erased it from his contacts. Couldn't bring himself to. He wrote the address down. Sealed the envelope. Held it in his hand for a long time. Was it guilt? Or just the ache of someone who had built an empire, only to realize he'd never built a place for his heart? He didn't know. He only knew that as he dropped the envelope into the outgoing tray, a quiet voice inside him said, "You're not over her. And you never really were." The envelope was gone. The moment passed, but Silas couldn't shake it. He spent the next few days moving through his life like a man trapped behind glass. Meetings, numbers, handshakes, smiles, all polished, all empty. His assistant updated him on please reply responses. None from Celeste. Of course not, she wouldn't come. Would she? Delia walked into the bedroom late one night, still dressed from an investor dinner. He was seated at the edge of the bed, tie half undone, staring at nothing. "You okay?" she asked, tone neutral. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." She nodded, slipping off her earrings. Big week ahead. He nodded too. They didn't kiss, didn't touch. They rarely did anymore. Not because of distance, because of detachment. Delia didn't press. She never did. They weren't built for emotional excavation. They were built for efficiency. Silas watched her disappear into the bathroom, the door closing with a soft click. He sat in the quiet, and for the first time in a long time, he wished someone would ask him the kind of question he didn't know how to answer. Like, why do your eyes go hollow when no one's looking? Or, who did you lose that still whispers through your silence? That night, he dreamed of color. Not cold steel, not graphs or schedules. Color, brush strokes across a concrete wall, the scent of turpentine, the sound of laughter as she flicked paint onto his arm. Celeste, not speaking, just smiling. She used to call him Machine Boy when he got too focused, and he'd call her Storm because she moved into his life like wind, changing everything without asking. He woke with his chest tight. There was no one beside him. He didn't realize he'd whispered her name in his sleep. The morning of the final guest deadline, Delia noticed his pause at the breakfast table. He looked at her, surprised. She didn't elaborate, just sipped her coffee. He gave a faint nod. Some things don't leave. Delia glanced down, tapped twice on her screen, and said nothing more. She wasn't cruel, just conditioned, like him. Later that day, he walked through the empty hallway of his home, stopping at a room that was supposed to be a library. The room had nothing in it but boxes, mostly untouched, some with things he didn't even remember packing. One was marked Old Stuff, Celeste in faded marker. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were small things, a sketch of him, looking sideways, a broken mug from their first apartment, a note she once left in his pocket. "You forget to smile. I'm here to remind you." He sat down beside the box. No audience, no spotlight, just him, and everything he couldn't say back then. He closed his eyes. "If she comes," he whispered, "I won't let her walk past me again." The mountain estate was cut into the hillside like it belonged there. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows curved around the main hall, letting in the snow-dusted pines. Staff in black suits moved like clockwork, placing name cards, adjusting centerpieces, and pouring champagne into waiting flutes. Outside, the wind moved lightly through the trees. Everything was immaculate, seamless, just like Silas had paid for. He stood near the arched terrace, tuck's crisp collar slightly too tight. From a distance, it looked like a perfect day for a new beginning. Inside him, though, everything felt foggy. He barely heard the music playing through the overhead speakers. Couldn't focus on the sequence of greetings, the staged photographs, the whispered compliments. People kept coming up to him, industry friends, investors, even a few distant relatives, all smiling, all commenting on the success, the view, the bride. He nodded, smiled when necessary, but his eyes kept drifting to the entrance. It wasn't obvious. He made sure of that, but he was waiting. Delia swept through the crowd effortlessly. Her gown shimmered under the light. She laughed at the right moments, posed where the photographer pointed, and made polite conversation like a woman rehearsed. She glanced at Silas a few times. He offered a smile back. She didn't ask what was on his mind. Maybe she didn't want to know. The music shifted. People started moving toward their seats. Someone signaled to the pianist. Silas was pulled aside by his best man for a final word of encouragement. But just before he took his place, a ripple moved through the room. Soft at first, a turning of heads, a few murmurs, a held breath. She was standing in the doorway, Celeste. She wasn't in anything dramatic, no sequins, no long train, just a deep green dress that fit like a memory. Her hair was pulled back, soft and undone. No lipstick, no jewelry. She didn't need it. There was something about her presence that made everything else in the room feel staged. Beside her stood a girl, small, slender, straight posture, chestnut brown hair, and wide, amber-flecked eyes. She held her mother's hand tightly, dressed in a simple blue dress, her shoes slightly dusted from the walk up the path. Silas couldn't move. His breath caught halfway up his chest. The girl looked at him. He looked back. No one said a word, but the resemblance said enough. Someone near the back gasped softly. Even Delia turned her head. The moment stretched like glass pulled thin. Celeste walked slowly, calmly, each step deliberate. Her heels didn't click. They whispered. Every guest turned, watching. She didn't scan the room. She looked only at Silas. She stopped just short of the first row. Silas stepped forward without realizing. His throat was dry, his hands cold. "Celeste," he said under his breath. She looked at the girl, then at him. "Meet Leora," she said simply. Silas blinked. His heart pounded against his ribs. "She's yours." The words didn't come in anger or regret, just truth, and they hit harder than a scream ever could. Silas didn't hear the music anymore, didn't feel the weight of the crowd behind him, didn't notice the two waiters frozen near the champagne table or the florist by the exit, clutching a clipboard like a shield. He could only look at the girl, at Leora. Her gaze didn't flinch. She looked at him the way someone looks at a question they don't know how to ask. He took a half step forward, but his feet felt heavy, like the floor had shifted beneath them. I didn't know," he said, barely audible. Celeste gave a quiet nod. "I know." Delia moved closer, one perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on Silas's arm. "Who is this?" she asked evenly. Celeste didn't turn to her. "She's his daughter." There it was, final, undeniable. The guests around them didn't speak. No one dared. The kind of silence that filled the room wasn't awkward. It was reverent, like they had all just watched a man come face to face with his missing piece. Leora looked down at her shoes. Silas knelt instinctively, his knees touching the wood floor, arms hanging limp at his sides. "What's your name?" he asked gently, his voice catching. The girl hesitated. "Leora," she said. "Mom calls me Rory sometimes." He smiled faintly. "Can I call you that too?" She gave the smallest nod, and that's when it hit him fully. 10 years. 10 years of school mornings, bedtime stories, Band-Aids and crayons and birthdays, all lived without him. He didn't cry, not yet, but his chest burned. He turned to Celeste. "Why?" She met his eyes calmly. "Because back then, you weren't someone I could reach. You should have told me." "I tried," she said, "more than once, but you were always somewhere else, even when you were in the same room." He closed his eyes. The guilt pressed in like a wave. Behind him, Delia cleared her throat. "We should take this outside," she said sharply. Celeste glanced at her now. "You go ahead." Silas stood slowly, never taking his eyes off Leora. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. "This wasn't meant to be cruel. I debated even coming, but she wanted to meet you. She knows who I am." Celeste nodded. "She's always known." That undid him. Silas dropped his gaze, pressing a hand to his chest like something was trying to break through. Delia's voice was harder now. "Silas, you need to speak with me, privately." Didn't even blink. Celeste placed a hand on Leora's shoulder and began to turn. They hadn't come for a scene. They came to give a truth, its moment. As they started to walk away, Silas stepped forward again. "Wait." Celeste paused. He turned to the crowd for the first time, his voice raw. "She's my daughter." No embellishment, no spin, just a man standing in front of everything he thought he wanted, while staring into the eyes of what he truly needed. What would you say if someone dropped a 10-year-old secret into your life on your wedding day? Share your thoughts below. We read every single comment. The ceremony never started. People murmured in small clusters. Some left early, uncomfortable. Others lingered in stunned silence, sipping champagne they suddenly didn't want. Delia was gone before the cake was cut. She didn't scream, didn't make a scene. She simply walked out the side terrace, her assistant close behind, and never came back in. Her final words to Silas were quiet, simple. "You're not here. You haven't been for a while. And now I know why." He didn't chase her, didn't try to explain. Because for once, he couldn't lie to himself. Silas sat alone in a side room meant for coat storage, elbows on knees, head in his hands. The tuxedo jacket had been tossed across a chair, his bow tie undone. His phone buzzed beside him unread. He stared at the floor, not the polished one beneath his feet, but the one in his mind, the hardwood of that old apartment. The lines of paint left by Celeste's bare feet, the shadow of a small girl in a sunlit hallway he never got to walk through. 10 years. 10 years. He whispered the number to himself like a confession. 10. There was a knock on the doorframe. Celeste stood there, Leora behind her, leaning slightly to the side, clutching a small paper bag. I brought her some juice. She gets nervous around people. Silas looked up slowly. You didn't come to hurt me, he said. No, why now, she asked, Celeste replied. Said if she ever had a dad, she wanted to see what kind of man he became. He blinked hard, swallowed once. Celeste stepped inside, the light from the hallway cutting across her face in soft lines. I thought I had everything, he said. I know, but none of it ever made me feel like I did when I was with you, even when it was hard, even when we barely spoke. She nodded. You were always chasing more, and I couldn't keep up with someone who never stopped moving. He looked at Leora, who sat quietly on a small bench drawing in a notebook. Can I spend time with her? Celeste tilted her head. She's shy. She doesn't open up easily. I'm not asking her to run into my arms, Silas said. I just want her to know I'm not a stranger anymore. Celeste studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. She's your daughter. That's never been in question. They stood in silence, both watching Leora draw. For a moment, nothing about the failed wedding mattered. Not the guests, not the speeches that would never be made. Just this room. Just this girl. And the two people who had created her, quietly, painfully, completely. The lounge was tucked at the back of the villa, far from the remaining guests and untouched hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't grand, just a long leather couch, a small table with a half-empty bottle of sparkling water, and wide windows looking out onto the trees below. Silas stood near the glass, his back to the room. The snow had picked up since earlier, dusting the evergreens like powdered sugar. But he wasn't looking at the view. He was staring at his reflection. His eyes didn't look like they belonged to a man who had just tried to start a new life. They looked like someone who had just been pulled backward through everything he worked to forget. Celeste entered quietly, closing the door behind her. She didn't speak right away, just set her coat on a chair and walked over to the table. Her movements were calm, deliberate. The same way she used to prepare her brushes before painting. Not rushed, not stiff, just present. Thank you, she said finally, for not turning us away. Silas turned. I didn't have the right to. She nodded, folding her hands. No, you didn't. Her voice wasn't angry, but it didn't soften either. He looked at her for a long time before sitting down across from her. I thought about you for years, he said. Thought about calling, writing. But I always told myself, if you wanted me in your life, you'd have let me know. And if you had truly wanted to be in mine, she said quietly, you would have found a way to show up. The silence between them was full, not with resentment, but with truths that had ripened too long. I didn't know she existed, he whispered. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Celeste stared at him steady. Because by the time I knew I was pregnant, you were already gone. Silas frowned. I wasn't gone. You were, she said. You were still in the apartment, still in our bed, but everything about you had already left. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I watched you disappear in stages, she continued. First your voice, then your eyes, then your time, and finally, the part of you that used to make me feel like we were in this together. He lowered his gaze. I didn't want to raise a child who would be taught that love only happens after meetings are done and numbers are met. I didn't want her to wait at the door for someone who never comes home. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. He rubbed his hands together, trying to steady his breath. I would have changed if I had known. She looked at him then, not with anger, but something deeper. That's the thing, Silas. You shouldn't have needed a child to change. You should have changed because the person you loved told you she was drowning. He leaned back in the chair, covering his face with both hands. He wasn't the man who used to deflect hard conversations anymore. He didn't have the energy to defend himself. She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper, set it gently on the table between them. He unwrapped it slowly. A photo. Leora, no more than 3, her cheeks streaked with blue and yellow paint, grinning with her hands raised like she just painted the whole world. She made this for Mother's Day, Celeste said. She painted the walls, the table, the floor. Silas stared at the image, his throat thick. She said, I made the sun, Mama. So now it'll never be dark. He blinked rapidly. But it was too late. The tears came. He didn't try to stop them. Silas held the photo like it was made of glass. The little girl smiling back at him was full of something he couldn't name, something bright, untouched by his absence. But now, knowing she had created that light despite him, not because of him, made it feel heavier than any loss he'd ever experienced. "She looks so happy," he said, almost to himself. "She is," Celeste replied. "Not every day, but most." He nodded slowly. "I missed it all," he said. "First words, first steps, her favorite cereal, the way she holds a crayon. I don't know any of it." Celeste folded her hands again. "No, you don't." Silas looked up, eyes red. "But I want to." She didn't respond right away. "I don't expect her to call me Dad tomorrow," he added, "or forgive me next week, but I want to start from wherever you'll let me." Celeste studied him, her face unreadable. He continued, "I thought I was doing everything right, that success would prove I was worth something, that if I just worked hard enough I'd finally be enough." His voice broke slightly. "But it's never been the money, or the titles. I think I was trying to fill the space you left, and I never could." Celeste took a breath as if steadying herself. "You don't have to punish yourself to earn her love," she said, "but you do have to show up." "I will." "Not once," she clarified. "Not for photos, not for moments. She doesn't need a highlight reel. She needs presence. Boring, consistent, everyday presence." Silas gave a faint nod. "I've never done anything slowly," he said, "but I'll learn." The room grew quiet again. She leaned back slightly, letting herself finally exhale. "Do you want to know the hardest part?" she asked softly. He nodded. "It wasn't leaving you," she said. "It was doing it while still loving you." He swallowed hard. "I would sit at the edge of the bed," she continued, "watching you sleep, trying to convince myself that if I waited just a little longer, the version of you I fell in love with would come back." She looked away now, toward the trees outside the window. "But he didn't. I think he's trying to now," Silas said. She turned back. "Are you?" "I don't even know who that version is anymore," he said honestly. "But I want to be someone who doesn't let her grow up wondering why I didn't try." Celeste blinked slowly. Not to hold back tears, just to hold herself steady. "You can't go back, Silas. This doesn't get rewritten." "I'm not trying to rewrite it," he said. "I'm trying to step into what's left. If there's anything—" He looked at her now, not as a man asking to reclaim something, but as someone standing in the wreckage, asking what could still be built. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a smaller envelope, light blue, handwritten. "She made this when I told her we were coming." She slid it across the table. He picked it up carefully, opened it, and pulled out a folded drawing. They were holding hands. At the top, in shaky letters, "Maybe we can be a family." Silas stared at it, his shoulders trembling. Celeste stood slowly. "I'll let you sit with that," she said quietly, and before she walked out she added, "Don't take too long deciding." Silas didn't move. The envelope sat open in his lap. The drawing rested beside the photo of Leora covered in paint. 2 pieces of paper, one full of color, one full of joy, and both a reminder of everything he hadn't been. The room was still, the kind of stillness that usually comes after a storm, when nothing's broken but everything feels different. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For most of his life he had been surrounded by rooms like this, quiet, expensive, controlled, but none of them had ever made him feel as small or as seen as this one did. Not one investor, not one headline, not one board seat had ever made him feel like he belonged the way this child's drawing just had. And yet, he wasn't in it. Not really. He was only there in hope. Maybe. The door behind him opened softly. He didn't look up, but small footsteps entered. He knew those weren't Celeste's. Leora stood a few feet from him, clutching a juice box. "I forgot my drawing," she said quietly. He turned, eyes soft. "I was just looking at it." She walked over, uncertain but curious. She glanced at the paper again. "It's not very good," she said. "I messed up the hands." Silas smiled gently. "It's perfect." She looked at him carefully. You cried." He nodded. "Yeah, why?" He took a moment before answering. "Because I didn't know someone like you existed." She didn't respond, just sat beside him on the couch, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. He didn't try to hold her hand, didn't move closer, just matched her stillness. After a few moments, she asked, "What do you do?" He gave a small shrug. "I build things, companies, ideas." "Can you build toys?" He let out the softest laugh. "Not yet, but I could try." It was small, but it was something. From the doorway, Celeste watched quietly, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Silas didn't see her. He was focused on Leora now, on every small motion she made, on the weight of this moment and how easily it could break. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a pack of colored pencils. "Do you want to draw one?" she asked. He blinked. "Like this?" "Yeah, but maybe with a tree. And a dog. I want a dog." He smiled again. "All right." She handed him a pencil and paper, and they sat there, just the two of them, sketching stick figures under a tree. No titles, no audience, no timeline. Just a man and his daughter, starting at the beginning. Celeste stepped away from the doorway, finally allowing herself to breathe again. Not with fear, but with the smallest flicker of trust. The villa emptied faster than expected. Guests slipped out without needing to be asked. No one said goodbye. No one needed to. By sunset, the ceremony that never was had left behind crumpled napkins, untouched desserts, and a silence that didn't belong to celebration. Silas stood in the hallway just outside the lounge, his jacket still off, shirt collar open. The planner approached him with a clipboard in hand. Her voice was low. "Do you still want the reception team to proceed with the schedule?" He looked past her, out the window. "No," he said. "Cancel everything." The clipboard lowered. "No statement to the press?" Silas shook his head. The planner nodded once, quietly turned, and left. He was alone. Outside, the last light of day dipped behind the peaks. Snow had begun to fall again, slow, quiet, steady. The air was sharp, clean, a kind of cold that demanded presence. He stepped out onto the back patio. No coat, no gloves, just a man in dress shoes and wrinkled sleeves walking into the hush of winter. Each step crunched softly. He moved past the hedges, past the trail that led to the ceremony site, and into the open garden that had been designed for photos and cocktail hour. Now it was empty, a white canvas, untouched. He exhaled, and his breath fogged in the air before fading, just like everything else. Silas stared up at the darkening sky. He thought of the moment the funding finally cleared, the first headline with his name, the day the company hit $1 billion, the feeling of everyone knowing who he was. And now, for the first time, he wished none of it had ever mattered to him as much as she did. They did. He remembered coming home late, finding sketches on the kitchen table, dinner gone cold. He remembered hearing Celeste cry through the bathroom door once, pretending not to notice. He remembered always telling himself, just a little longer. Just one more launch, then I'll make time. But time never waited, and now here he was, a man with nothing but footprints behind him. He stopped walking and stood still, letting the cold settle into his bones. He didn't shiver. He just breathed. For once, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt honest, because for the first time in years, he wasn't running toward something, or away from it. He was simply standing. If you've ever had to choose between your dreams and someone you loved, what did you choose, and would you change it now? Let us know in the comments. These conversations matter. The snow deepened as evening settled. Silas stayed outside longer than he should have, his hands numb, his lips pale, but he didn't care. The silence had stripped everything away. He didn't think about press fallout, didn't calculate how shareholders would react to a canceled wedding. For once, none of that could touch him. All that remained was the question echoing in his mind, what if I had just listened? He sat on a bench beneath a pine tree, the same one that had been strung with lights for the ceremony. They were still glowing, soft, yellow bulbs draped from branch to branch, a setup designed for photographs that would now never be taken. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the frozen ground. I kept chasing things I couldn't hold, he muttered to himself, and let go of the one thing that never asked me to be anything but present. He thought of the way Leora had drawn him with long arms, how she left room for him in the picture, despite him never being in the frame. And Celeste, the way she had watched without demanding anything, without trying to shame him, just told the truth, told him what she needed. And then she left. A wind passed through the trees, tugging softly at the suit shirt beneath his vest. He closed his eyes. He saw her again, on that ladder, painting the side of the community center, hair tied back, fingernails stained, laughing at something he said that probably wasn't even funny. He saw her kneeling on the old couch, trying to fix the heater with a spoon because they didn't have tools. He saw her sketching on the kitchen tile with chalk because she couldn't find paper fast enough when an idea hit. He saw her crying quietly the night she left, and how he didn't follow. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't believe she would really go. He stood slowly, dusted snow off his slacks, and turned back toward the villa. Inside, the lights were dimmer. Staff were finishing cleanup. Chairs were being stacked. The playlist had long stopped. It no longer looked like a celebration. It looked like a place that had been emptied of everything but truth. He walked straight through, past his room, past the ballroom, and out the front doors. A driver stood by a black SUV at the edge of the lot, steam rising from the exhaust. Silas nodded. "Just one stop," he said. 20 minutes later, he stood outside a boutique inn at the edge of town. Not flashy, not massive, just a warm-looking place tucked beside the hillside, where a woman and her daughter had checked in earlier that day. He stood in front of room 4C, adjusting his sleeves, the weight of the evening pressing gently into his spine. Then he knocked, softly. No answer. He was about to leave when the door opened just a few inches. Celeste, no makeup, hair loose, sweater sleeves tugged past her wrists. She blinked once, surprised, not angry, just surprised. He didn't say anything right away. Then, "I want to know her. I want to know you again." She said nothing. He didn't fill the silence. Finally, she asked, "Are you asking for time?" He nodded. "All the time I have left." Celeste opened the door wider. Silas stepped inside slowly, unsure if he should remove his shoes, or speak, or ask permission to stay. The room was quiet. Not the strained silence that hung between them at the wedding, but a gentle hush, like the room itself had been waiting for them to meet without the weight of an audience. The lamp in the corner was on, casting a warm golden light. A teacup sat on the side table. A sketchpad, half full, lay closed on the bed. Leora's small backpack rested near the couch, a coloring book half sticking out. She was asleep in the next room, Celeste explained quietly, pulling the door mostly closed but not latched. Silas sat on the edge of the armchair near the window. His hands rested on his knees, unsure of where to begin. Celeste poured herself tea and offered him a cup. He shook his head. She didn't press. "I thought I'd feel angry seeing you again," she said gently, taking the chair opposite him. He raised his eyes, cautious, and, "I didn't," she said. "I just felt like I knew this moment would come, one way or another." He nodded slowly. "Me too." They sat in stillness, not awkward, not heavy. "I kept waiting for a letter," she said, "or a call, something, but nothing ever came. Then why didn't you?" He breathed in long and deep. "Because reaching out meant admitting I failed you, that I had no excuse for not fighting harder. You didn't fail me," she said. "You just forgot to include me." Silas looked up at her. Those words sank deeper than any accusation ever could have. "I was so focused on proving something to the world," he whispered. "But when the world finally gave me everything I wanted, I didn't know what to do with it, because the only person I wanted to celebrate with wasn't there." Her hands curled around the cup. "I used to walk past your name on magazine covers," she said. "I never felt jealousy. I felt distance, like you'd become someone I used to know." His voice broke slightly. "I felt that too, and I hated it." She set the cup down and looked at him. "But that night," she said, "when you held her photo like it was sacred, I saw something else." He waited. "I saw you come back." He looked away, fighting emotion. "I don't deserve her," he said. "No," Celeste replied. "But she's not asking you to deserve her. She's asking you to be there. There's a difference." Silas stood and walked to the window. Snow continued to fall lightly, lit only by the glow of street lamps lining the walkway below. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But I came here because if there's a door you'll leave open, even a little, I want to find my way through it." Celeste stood too, quietly. "I'm not promising answers," she said. "I'm not asking for them," he replied. She looked at him then, really looked, not as a symbol of what she'd lost, but as a man standing, willing, and ready to return with nothing but humility in his hands. Celeste walked to the nightstand and dimmed the lamp until the room was soft with amber light. Silas hadn't moved from the window. He was still looking out, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not from the cold, but from everything he was finally allowing himself to carry. She joined him quietly. For a moment neither spoke. Then she reached up and gently touched his arm. He turned, not quickly, not in surprise, just with stillness, like he knew the moment had been waiting for them both. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "You're different. So are you," he said. "Do you miss who we were?" "I miss who we could have been if I'd stayed still long enough to notice you were fading." She nodded. That was the truth. No edits, no performance, just truth. They stood only inches apart now. She placed her hand against his chest, right over his heartbeat. He didn't move. He placed his hand over hers. No words, no assumptions, just contact, a moment of presence. "I used to fall asleep holding your hand," she whispered. He smiled, eyes heavy. "I remember. You always let go halfway through the night." His smile faded. "I won't let go now," he said quietly. Her eyes searched his face, not to test him, but to understand if what he said lived beyond the moment. What she saw wasn't the man who once built walls of ambition. It was someone still raw, but ready. She stepped closer. Her forehead touched his. They stood like that, breathing together, not moving quickly, not trying to recreate the past, just standing still, finally, in the same moment at the same time. He reached for her slowly, one hand on her waist, the other at the side of her face. Didn't rush. She leaned in, and their lips met. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't claiming. It was quiet, steady, a question, and an answer. They moved to the bed, not out of passion, but out of something deeper, relief, that they had made it back. Somehow, together. She unbuttoned his shirt. He traced the outline of her collarbone. Their hands moved slowly, intentionally. Every movement was unspoken gratitude. Not to fix, not to return, but to begin. They lay down, face to face, eyes open. He kissed the space between her eyebrows. She touched the line of his jaw, the one she used to draw from memory. Clothes were removed without urgency, not in heat, but in reverence, like they were unwrapping something they once held but never understood how to keep. They found each other again, not in the fire of young love, but in the warmth of something earned. They didn't rush, didn't need to. This time everything had weight. Every kiss, a question answered. Every breath, a promise made without being spoken. The sky outside turned from indigo to soft gold. Silas stirred first, blinking against the early light slipping through the curtain. Celeste lay beside him, her back turned, her breathing slow and even. One hand rested near her face, the other beneath the pillow they now shared. For a moment he didn't move. He just watched her, not with longing, not with regret, with awe, because she was still here, not because she had to be, but because something, quiet, unspoken, unfinished, had pulled them back into the same orbit. He reached gently and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She shifted slightly but didn't wake. The door to the second room creaked. Soft footsteps padded across the floor. Leora appeared, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and fuzzy socks. She paused at the edge of the doorway, blinking at the unfamiliar scene, her mother in bed, Silas sitting beside her. He didn't rush to stand. He just smiled gently. "Morning," he said softly. Leora looked unsure. She clutched the stuffed animal in her arms a little tighter. "Is it okay that I'm here?" she asked. He nodded. "You're always okay here." She stepped a little closer. "Did you sleep here?" "Yes." She sat on the edge of the bed, not too close, but close enough to be seen. Mom was snoring. Silas chuckled under his breath. "I know. I used to nudge her for it. Did it work?" "Sometimes. Sometimes it made it worse." Leora smiled. A small one, but real. Celeste stirred, eyes fluttering open. She smiled when she saw them both. No confusion, no panic. Just peace. She reached for the robe at the foot of the bed and sat up. Leora leaned against her. Celeste pulled her in gently, resting her chin on the girl's head. Silas watched the moment from across the bed, one knee up, arm draped casually across the blanket. For the first time, he wasn't on the outside of something. He was close enough to feel it, to be part of it. Leora looked at him again. "Are you going to stay?" Silas didn't hesitate. "If you'll let me..." She tilted her head. "Like, forever?" He looked to Celeste, then back to her. "As long as I'm welcome, yes." Leora was quiet. Then she climbed down from the bed, walked over to the nightstand, and took her colored pencils from the drawer. She handed them to him. "You can draw with me after breakfast," she said. That was it, her version of a yes. Silas took the pencils in both hands like she'd given him something rare. Celeste stood now, stretching slowly. She walked past Silas and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You look better," she said. "Like someone who slept through the night for the first time in 10 years? She smiled. Exactly like that. They didn't kiss. Didn't linger. Just shared a glance that said more than words, one that said, "We're not there yet, but we're here." The inn's small dining area was quiet, warm, and bathed in morning light. Only a few guests sat scattered at the tables, sipping coffee or reading. The fireplace cracked softly, filling the space with a calm hum that made everything feel slower, safer. Silas stood just inside the doorway, watching as Celeste helped Leora choose between oatmeal and toast. She wore a yellow hoodie 2 sizes too big and purple socks that didn't match. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid already fraying around the edges. She looked like every other 10-year-old, and nothing like any moment he'd ever lived through. He cleared his throat lightly as he walked toward their table. Celeste looked up first, smiling gently. "Hey, we saved you a seat." He sat down carefully across from them, folding his hands together like someone trying not to knock anything over. Leora looked at him briefly, then went back to adding sugar to her oatmeal. He waited until she was done stirring, then he leaned forward just slightly. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Celeste gave her a small nod. Leora looked up at him again, eyes steady but cautious. "Okay." Silas stood and held out his hand, not to take hers but to invite. She didn't hesitate long. She got up and followed him to the window seat in the corner, far enough for privacy but close enough for comfort. They sat down side by side. Snow was still falling outside, soft and quiet. Leora clutched her juice box. He kept his hands folded in his lap. "I don't want to say too much," he began. "But I want to say something." She glanced up. "Okay." He turned to face her fully. Then, without ceremony, he knelt down on the floor beside her chair. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. It just felt right. To meet her where she was, not above her, not ahead of her. The three of them walked along the edge of the trail behind the inn, boots crunching softly through fresh snow. It wasn't a hike. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was simple, slow, the kind of moment that didn't ask for attention, but meant everything. Leora walked between them, holding a mittened hand in each of hers. She didn't talk much. She didn't have to. The silence was full. Soft clouds of breath floated ahead of them, and tree limbs drooped gently under the weight of snow. The wind had quieted, as if even the sky had agreed to lower its voice for this walk. Silas had never walked this slowly in his life, and never felt so sure of every step. He looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around his fingers. Her glove was damp from the snow, her stride still a little off balance. She didn't need him to guide her. She just wanted him beside her. He let that realization settle deep into his chest, deeper than ambition had ever reached. Celeste walked with her head slightly tilted, eyes scanning the trees, occasionally pointing out a bird or a strange shape in the snow. He remembered this version of her, curious, present, unhurried. But there was something new now, too. She wasn't reaching backward anymore. She was walking forward, with or without him. And he was quietly asking to be part of that forward. Up ahead, a wooden bench sat at the bend of the trail, brushed with light flakes. They reached it together. Leora hopped up first, brushing space clear on either side. Silas and Celeste joined her. For a long while they sat quietly, not looking at phones, not filling the moment with talk, just breathing in the cold, feeling the weight of one another beside them. Silas looked down at his boots, then out toward the trees, and then he said, more to the wind than to anyone else, "I spent 10 years trying to become someone people couldn't forget. And the whole time, my daughter was living in a little art studio I never stepped inside." He turned toward Celeste. Her eyes were misty but calm. She didn't interrupt. He turned toward Leora. She leaned against his arm, just slightly, enough. Silas exhaled slowly, watching his breath drift into the air before vanishing. Celeste reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small thermos. She poured some warm cider into a cup and passed it to Leora. Then she handed the second cup to Silas. He accepted it with quiet gratitude, warming his hands around the heat. "This is all I ever wanted," she said softly. He turned to her. "What is?" "This," she answered. "Just this." She nodded toward the snow, toward their daughter, toward the silence that wasn't empty anymore. "I never needed luxury, or status, or the future you were chasing," she added. "I just needed you to show up." He stared at her, heart full, throat tight. "I'm here now," he said. "I know," she replied, "and that's the difference." They sat a little longer, watching as Leora built a small snow pile at their feet. She looked up. "Can we come back here next weekend?" Silas looked at Celeste. She raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Your move." He smiled. "If your mom agrees, and if you let me carry your backpack next time, yes." The bench creaked slightly as Celeste leaned back, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't lean in. He didn't speak. He just stayed. And for once, that was everything. Leora grabbed their hands again. They began the walk back, footprints behind them softening under the fresh snow. But they didn't look back. There was no need. Sometimes the most life-changing moments don't arrive with noise. They don't knock down doors or announce themselves. They appear in the quiet, in the hush of snow under your boots, in the warmth of a child's trust, or in the silence of someone finally deciding to stay. Silas Wren had everything the world said mattered, but when he saw his daughter's face for the first time, he realized he'd missed the one thing that did. Not because he was a bad man, but because he kept showing up late to the only place love ever lives, the present. There's a myth that love is grand, that it's loud, that it shouts from rooftops and fights through fire. But more often, love whispers. It shows up when the camera isn't rolling, when no one's watching, when there's nothing left to gain, only something to give. That's what Silas learned, and maybe that's what we all need to remember. Love doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. It's not about saying the right words at the right time. It's about being there when the words run out, when all that's left is your willingness to try again. Even broken things can be rebuilt, not by pretending they were never broken, but by choosing to keep building anyway. With patience, with honesty, with care. And children, they don't remember how expensive your suit was. They remember if you sat on the floor with them, if you showed up when you said you would, if you asked how they were and actually listened. They don't need titles, they need time. And more than anything, they need your attention, not the kind you give in passing, but the kind that doesn't check the clock. Silas missed 10 years, but he was given a door, and he chose to walk through it, not to reclaim the past, but to start the only thing he could, a present worth being part of. So if there's someone you've been meaning to reach out to, if there's a child, a parent, a partner, a friend, someone who's been waiting for you not to change the world, but just to be in theirs, don't wait for the perfect moment. There isn't one. Just show up, and keep showing up. That's where the healing begins. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need a reminder about love, forgiveness, or second chances. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Thank you for watching Mr. Ross Story Trail, where every story leaves a footprint.